That's cool. City sculpture park made out of old car parts.
It seems like art is what happened.
Art is what happened. When everything collapsed, the artists moved in.
Yes.
Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. You're with me today on the last leg of the Mobtown tour, and that was me and my father driving through Detroit. We started a few weeks ago in a small outpost in Door County, Wisconsin, huddled in the northern woods, playing bebop and talking about Bob Dylan, and then meeting with the oldest working jazz musician alive, the Twin Cities' own Irv Williams. Then we went to Chicago and talked to Dave Jemilo, the owner of the Green Mill, and examined the role of club owners in the music community. And then we went to Milwaukee to explore the idea of regional or local sounds in jazz. You can hear those episodes, as well as all the previous Third Story podcast interviews, by visiting third-story.com. This week, we're at Cliff Bell's in Detroit, a classic-feeling place, almost like a movie set. And then we're in Cleveland at Nighttown, a unique jazz venue if ever there was one, in the heart of the B3 belt. But before we take you there, I want to take you here. The Collingwood Art Center in Toledo, Ohio. This old, foreboding, ivy-covered former convent is now home to an emerging arts community in Toledo. It's also the seat of Toledo Pride, and tonight, its cavernous basement is host to the only jazz concert in town. Entering the building, you get a sense that a lot of history has taken place here. What kind of history? That's harder to say. We pass a whiteboard in the main entrance announcing the evening's activities in the building. Downstairs, the Ben Sidran Quartet plays jazz. Upstairs, Paranormal Toledo. Be there or be scared. I guess one way or the other, you get to spend some time with the spirits. But I'm reminded of that scene in Spinal Tap where the band plays opposite a puppet show.
If I told them once, I told them 100 times to put Spinal Tap first and puppet show last.
As we make our way into the basement, we follow a sign that says,
Fallout Shelter. We're actually following a sign that says Fallout Shelter into the gig.
Then we see the room.
Wow.
It's like a cave. It's huge, reverberant, dark, subterranean. Chinese lanterns hang from the ceiling. There's an old beat-up upright piano on a low stage along one wall. Rows of chairs are set up in front of the stage, and high tables dot the space. There's a sense of being truly underground.
I'm Leo.
Like just being here makes you part of the resistance. And we meet Lexi.
Hey.
Hey, Lexi, I'm from Jaffe, too. I hear
I'm
everything
Leo.
good about you guys.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
Can you tell me a little bit about where we are right now?
This is the Collingwood Art Center.
Yes.
And so we were built in 1905 by the Ursuline nuns. And it was a successful women's college until the 1970s. It was taken over by a really old guy who's walking around here. You saw him sitting down here looking grumpy. No, yeah, it had the residence from 1984 to 2014. So it was really not set up for public shows. Really, the first thing we did down here was my wedding reception, and that was in 16.
So this is starting to get this
yeah,
going.
So
is it?
and we're making great money on this because it's so much more touchable for anyone to be able to
put something together. Yeah.
Exactly. This they can rent in a weekend
Pretty cheap,
for $250.
Yeah.
And that staffs it. We're we have somebody to park people, and somebody want to be here.
And what's upstairs?
So we have 93 studios essentially.
Are they occupied?
And 70 some now. So we're down to I think about 6 that are usable that aren't occupied. And the rest we have to judge.
Visual artists.
All of it.
So cool.
Massage therapists.
This space is oddly haunted. Maybe there are ghosts of some kind here after all. We immediately start improvising music that seems to fit the room. Okay, so this is how our tour ends, in the basement of a convent in Toledo, hiding out with a couple hundred curious people. It's not a jazz club. It's not really even a business. It's music, it's art, growing up through the cracks in the concrete like wildflowers. We're in the heart of the Rust Belt, the part of the country that has suffered enormous economic setbacks. Toledo has had population loss over the last 40 years. It's a beautiful city. It has a tradition of supporting the arts, and jazz legends like Art Tatum and Jon Hendricks came from here. But it's also somewhat in the shadow of Detroit, and the ripple effects of that economic depression are felt here too. Today, Toledo is experiencing a bit of an uptick, new investment and revitalization downtown. Still, a favorite phrase that I heard people saying over and over at Collingwood, at a hipster coffee shop, at the rooftop bar in my hotel was, "This is great. You'd never even know you were in Toledo." So, the economy is complicated. Politicians are pliable. Real estate is unreliable. What do we turn to? The arts. The arts are so often the last thing we think of when it comes to our public funding or even our private giving. But just look, they're the first thing we as people create when there's nothing else. We take a convent and turn it into creative capital. But before we found ourselves in the underground, we were above ground in the elegant Cliff Bells in Detroit. It's an ornate Art Deco upper Midwestern gem of a club. Like something out of Bullets Over Broadway, you can feel the moonshine coursing through the veins of this room, and if you squint hard enough, you can still see the cigar smoke hanging in the air.
This place is wild, man.
I like this. Every place we played the last week has been the same.
Walking into the space is like being transported to another time. We meet Shayna, the waitress.
Shayna, do you know the whole story? You know the story about...
What do you want to know?
I want to know what it was originally, when it became a music venue, why did it close, who opened it, what was the scene?
All the good things.
Yeah.
Okay, come on, come on.
Okay.
So, it originally opened in 1935 as Cliff Bells. So it was originally meant to be 10 stories, but they capped it at 2 during the Depression, which is probably why the pillars in the middle are so large. They were probably meant to support multiple floors.
Oh, the building was going to be taller.
It was going to be taller. All the ceilings used to be gold leaf like this, but because of the cigar smoke, and the kitchen actually used to be on this floor, they put a hinge on the ceiling on that side, but they like the look of the wood, so they put a lacquer over it.
Oh.
There used to be a blind pig, so like an illegal pub bar, that used to be down the stairwell behind the soundboard. Right. And that's where this pretty backsplash came from. It used to be down there.
Wow.
Now there's this cool door down there. It's like a ticketed door, like you know when you go to a movie theater and you put your money on it? Right. So it used to be the door that was on the blind pig. Right. And I think he saved it to put on our little wine cellar down there.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So that's pretty cool. Then it was open until the 70s and 80s, and then it changed hands. It became the Cove, the winery, and one other joint.
So it belonged to Cliff until the 70s.
Yep. And then it changed hands. Then it closed in 96 and reopened in 2005 or 2006. And then the mural was a newer addition, who's actually the guy is supposed to look like our doorman, Rosie, that collects cover, feeding the feral.
Is he going to be here tonight, Rosie?
He probably will.
Okay. Now talking about today, present day, what's the scene like here? Who comes here?
All kinds of people. Out-of-towners like to come, because it's kind of like one of those spots you want to visit, because it's like a diamond in the rough. You don't know what it looks like until you step inside the doors. That's my best way of describing it to anyone. And that's what makes it fun. And we have jazz 6 nights a week. You guys know some are local, some are from out of town. And it makes it fun. It makes it a really good vibe. People like that when they come out. You get a whole experience that way.
And I want to ask you one more question, because we just showed up. We are not like super familiar with the scene in Detroit. How does Detroit feel to you right now?
It's growing right now. It's got.
While the inside of Cliff Bells proclaims 1930s elegance, just outside the front door is a completely different reality. It's a Brutal reminder of what Detroit has been through. Directly across the street is a tall building, maybe 20 stories high, that is completely boarded up. Have you ever seen a tall office building totally abandoned with the windows blown out or boarded up in America in 2017? Detroit is an interesting case. You can drive down one street and find the biggest Whole Foods you've ever seen, art museums, theaters, and the next street over, it's like a war zone. Cats on the corner nodding out, empty lots, garbage strewn all over. But you know it's a funny thing? Because our audience at Cliff Bell's in many ways represented the best of America. The club booker R.J. Spangler, a swinging drummer and band leader in his own right, brought us up.
It's my honor to have him here. Making his first public appearance in Detroit. First public appearance ever in Detroit. So y'all are great for being here. Normally, in a crowd like this, I would say, make sure that you keep it down so you can listen to what he's going to do. But I think you guys are going to do that without me telling you. All right, so without further ado, please put your hands together for the wonderful Mr. Ben Cedric.
It was by far the most racially mixed crowd we played for, and the people in the room were fans. Old friends from college got together like a de facto reunion to go out for a night on the town and relive their youth. Folks came with old records to sign, like old from the 70s old. Some people even had my records, and they were happy to be there, and they were having a good time, and it felt good. One thing is clear. When all else seemed to fail, it was the arts that survived in Detroit. In fact, turns out that abandoned, boarded-up building across from Cliff Bell's does have one use today. Pop-up art installations and music parties. When you've got lemons, you make lemonade. And when you've got nothing, you can still make art. Driving from Detroit to Cleveland the next day, we talked about it in the car.
We are so lucky we got music, man.
Fuck yeah.
Imagine people who don't have music.
Oh, man.
What a poverty in their lives. Especially when you see what it does to people, man. The love in that room for what we were doing, and the fact that we came to town,
exactly, man.
It was overwhelming,
That's what
really.
we're here for.
Yes.
Yeah. It was
That's our
overwhelming.
job in life, man.
We're driving, me, my dad, Bob Rockwell, the sax player, and bass player Billy Peterson. Tonight, we'll meet up with our old pal, alto saxophonist Richie Cole. He's a legendary cat and a world-class character. But while we're still on the road, we contemplate the source of all creativity.
You know, once Richie Cole and I were driving across Arizona in his van at night, and we were making up this story where we were two jazz guys, hipsters, were out in the desert, and a flying saucer came down.
Yeah.
And one of the musicians took out his horn and started playing, and it turned out that was a way to communicate with the aliens, and the aliens let it be known they wanted to go to the leader, so the jazz guy took him to James Moody. You know, and the idea of jazz as a virus or something that can heal the world, it's like essential to the American jazz experience in a way, right? I mean, that's how we all think of it.
Yeah.
Man, there's this interview on the internet of me and Sun Ra.
Oh.
That somebody found recently and posted.
Oh.
And I'm talking to Sun Ra about, you know, being from outer space and stuff. And it's like a 5-minute conversation. And you don't know if he's serious or not. And he doesn't let you know. And he's got this sweet little look on his face, you know, where he's telling you, he's from outer space. And
it's great.
What's so cool about it is you kind of get the feeling, you know, that what he's talking about is that we're all from outer space.
Yes, that's what
That's what this is, man. We're in outer space.
We are in outer space.
We are in outer space.
That is a great way of saying it.
Yeah, right. And that's part of his teaching, man.
Yes.
It's not us and them, it's us.
Yes.
But you know about this phenomenon called Afrofuturism.
Yeah.
Sunrise, like a part of. There is evidence that there is a tribe in Africa. It goes back so far. Their knowledge of scientific things
that they were in touch with the aliens.
is so old.
Yeah.
It's before Europeans came to Africa.
Yeah. I love that stuff. I'm into it. Space dust.
Yeah,
Space dust. Yeah.
Space dust.
Virus.
Virus.
Yes, man.
Jazz virus.
Jazz virus. Well, that's it. What if all life on the planet is virus?
Yeah. Exactly.
What if there was like a little starter,
Yeah.
like, for sourdough,
Yes.
Yeah,
that
but
came down a few million years
Totally.
ago, and
All right.
boom.
Boom! We drive on into the space dust. Detroit in the rear view, Cleveland ahead. If Detroit provoked complex existential emotions, arriving at Nighttown in Cleveland provided its own set of questions. Namely, could the jazz club in Cleveland really be in such a nice neighborhood?
Jeez, this is over.
Isn't it beautiful?
It's gorgeous.
Where are we going?
Delaware Drive.
Right here.
Yeah, no, but it's like...
Oh, yeah, but where?
Oh, wow.
Well, we're going to be playing in Cleveland Heights.
Oh.
So maybe, look at this. How nice.
This is
Cleveland, Ohio.
Who would have guessed? I'd never.
Wow. Are we going to the gig now?
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it does it.
I don't understand either. This is not Cleveland.
Ben's not
I,
even saying, don't get
Glad
it.
I'm not driving.
I kind of remember.
Am I taking us the wrong place?
I don't. I was wondering, should we check? It says we're 1 minute away, so this is going to be
Let's
good
just
one way or
see
the
here.
other. Or you might have typed in the wrong place.
bus ride here?
No, Nighttown. It says we're coming to Nighttown, man,
Wow.
Look at this.
in 1 minute.
You got to be kidding me. Here it is.
No,
There it is.
There it
Nighttown.
is. Wow.
Fuck me.
And look at the traffic here.
Right on, Leo.
Don't say I never take you guys anywhere.
No, man, this is unbelievable.
Hello, Cleveland! Hello, Cleveland!
Thank you. Bob Dylan, see that worked out. That worked out. I mean, I respect the fact that you took Bob Dylan music from the 60s and brought it into the 1940s. That's what we call progress in jazz. That's jazz progress. Yeah, that's right. Phil Woods told me. Yeah. And Phil Woods, of course, a great jazz philosopher, he said, times are tough out here. He had a quartet. He said, but times are so tough, I'm going to go to a quintet. He said, expand, it's the American way. And he said, if times get harder, big band. He's going big band. That's the jazz philosophy.
I know another man who travels often with a big band.
Yeah, who's that?
Richie Cole.
Richie Cole? Is he here? Ladies and gentlemen, Richie Cole. Oh my goodness. I didn't know he was here. Well, I live and breathe.
Richie Cole is an alto saxophone player who sometimes goes by the nickname Alto Madness. He was a kind of prodigy, an early and fast-rising star in the jazz world of the late 1960s and early 70s. He played with so many great people: Buddy Rich, Freddie Hubbard, Eddie Jefferson, Sonny Stitt, the Manhattan Transfer. And Richie's a road warrior, a guy who could find a gig under a rock in the desert. If I played 5 gigs with him in my life, I have at least 10 stories to tell about it. One time he called me to put together a band to play with him outside Rockford, Illinois. I was still living in Madison at the time, and he was living in Rockford, I guess. I called some friends to play, and we drove out into the Illinois countryside looking for this roadhouse where we were supposed to play. This was before smartphones, maybe even before cell phones. I had written directions. I remember I was with my friend Tim in the car. We drove deeper and deeper into the country, like from a 4-lane highway to a 2-lane highway to a country road, no streetlights. I was absolutely convinced that we were lost when all of a sudden we came to a crossroads. And there on our left was what looked like an old converted gas station, which was now a supper club. And in the window was a sign, and on that sign it said, "One night only, Richie Cole." We walked into the joint carrying our instruments. The front room was a bar. Everyone turned to look at us, and just as quickly they looked away. In the back was a dining room. Low, drop ceiling, you know, that fireproof kind, and red and white tablecloths, the sticky ones. The waitress pointed to a corner and told us to set up there. And we did, but no sign of Richie. About a minute before we were supposed to start, Richie burst through the door. Big hugs, all smiles and energy, put his horn together, handed out books to everybody, turned to the audience, such as it was, and proclaimed us to be the Alto Madness Orchestra. We played 2 tunes with him, one up-tempo and one ballad. Then he turned to us and said, "Okay, boys, trio time." He spent most of the rest of the night at the bar. I wouldn't trade that gig for anything. And then there was another time when he showed up at my childhood home with a guy he maintained was actually Mr. Clean and insisted we record a demo of a song called "Midnight at the Starlight Haunted Ballroom" as soon as possible. And we did. It was great. Richie's an old pal of my dad's. They used to hang out a lot and travel together. I remember him fondly from when I was a boy. And this reunion in Cleveland, it was sweet. So we sat down after the gig to talk, all 3 of us.
Richie Cole, Ben Sidran.
Yes.
Me.
You.
Kid Leo.
Kid
Nighttown.
Leo. Nighttown.
Cleveland. Yep.
Cleveland.
Long time coming.
Long time gone.
Yep.
So, Richie, we've been talking out here about being on the road, how that used to be the thing, how I know it was so important to you when you were coming up, being on that bus, being on Buddy's bus, man, that being a way of life. And then you were on the road in the van with Eddie, that the road was everything, man.
Yep, it was.
So looking back, man, now the world is so totally different. Can you frame your career based on the fact that the road is not there the way it used to be? How has that affected you? What does that do?
You know, a lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm almost 70 years old now, and I broke my leg a couple years ago, so I can't move like I used to. Plus, the traveling these days, it used to be fun to be on an airplane and go. It was fascinating. It was like, oh my God, Berlin, oh my God, LA, man. And I was like, oh God, I got to go back to Rome again. Shit, you know? If you go through all the security and everything, it's just a pain in the ass to travel these days. It used to be fun. Plus, you know, I've seen as much as I want to see of the world. You know, I've been there. I'd like to go back again maybe, but it just hurts too much these days. You know, I'm living in Pittsburgh now. I got a lot of good things happening. Got my recording company. I got a lot of little local gigs. I still travel. I might be going to Italy after the first of the year, and you know, I got my daughter and grandkids out in New Jersey, so I go back there and do a few things in New York. They live up in Roselle Park, North Jersey. But I'm perfectly happy living my life right now as it is, you know. And thank God I met you, Ben Sidran. You know, I have several people in my life that were very, very important. Buddy Rich in the beginning, 1969 was Buddy Rich Band, 2.5 years. Then Eddie Jefferson, very, very important. Meeting him in hand transfer. Meeting you, Ben Sidran, and Kid Leo when you were 3 years old, playing that one note on the clarinet, which I'll never forget.
A.
It was an A. It was an A. Squeak. It was perfect. It was like he knew one note. Squeak. Perfect. You know.
Unfortunately, the song was in B flat, but that's all right.
It doesn't matter. It's like
matter.
a tone. He was ahead of his time, even at 3 years old. You know, dig.
Yeah.
And then, you know, one of the thrills of my life was working and recording with Sonny Stitt, and that was, you know, he's always been my hero since I was a kid. So there's several people important, like I say, you're one of them, and a lot of other people in between, but several like milestone people. Mm-hmm. And I've been very, very lucky in my career. I can't complain, and I'm doing fine now. I have no women in my life. I'm like Martin Luther King. Thank God Almighty, free at last, thank God Almighty. You know, I'm living in a one-room apartment with 2 TVs and a piano in a retirement home, and I love it in Pittsburgh. So that's my story, guys. I'm the luckiest guy I know.
That's
pretty much it, man.
Boom.
I mean,
I don't think you can go very many places after that.
No, that's
Boom.
it, man. The luckiest guy in the world,
I'm
man.
the luckiest guy I know. And not that I've always been that lucky. You know my story.
Yeah.
I've been up and down forever.
To come through the trials and tribulations that you've been through, and to be here positive in the end.
With an attitude, good attitude.
A good attitude, but I guess it's a cliche to say it, but, you know, the music got you through it, right?
It did, but only because of music. Without the music, who knows where I'd be? I don't know. Music got me through it, you know. I just been, a lot of things fell into place for me. And like I say, I've been very fortunate to meet a lot of great people who helped me out, and I learned from. And now I'm trying to pass it on to other people to help them out, you know.
Well, and the fact that you got involved in writing, doing arrangements and doing charts, man, that's sort of like when the situation was really rough and you had physical problems and all this stuff, you immediately turned to things you could do by yourself without traveling, man, which was very interesting, man.
Remember that record we did, Max, the violins section? 8 guys named Max, Weinberg, Goldberg, Dishberg. We did a violin band. Remember on the liner notes, I said I wrote this music in every bar from Sydney to Singapore to Hong Kong, every airport bar.
Yep.
I think you write those notes. I think
I probably wrote that.
It was fantastic, you know. No.
Well, here, see, this is me and Richie. We've been on the road together, not always in the same place.
Not
simultaneously, but we're out on the road. Now, this has been since 1978. So that would be coming up on 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see you down the road.
And here we are. Still hanging in there. Alto Madness.
Alto Madness.
Look at
Folks, if you haven't heard the previous Mobtown episodes, you know you can always go to third-story.com and check them out, because there certainly are some through lines here, not least of which is the question of what the road represents to jazz musicians as a generalized myth, and to me personally. But the conversations with 98-year-old Irv Williams and club owner Dave Jemilo stay with us today. Here, my dad and I debrief one last time in yet another hotel room.
If you're going to put a face on what the jazz road is, if you're going to put a face on what it means, on the one hand, you have Irv Williams, who at 98 years old is healthy, happy, part of a community, playing good, strong, humorous. And on the other hand, you have Richie Cole, who's been a wandering gypsy for 45 years on the road. He winds up with no home, with no family. His health is compromised, and he's 30 years younger than Irv Williams. The road is a brutal mistress, and you got to be real careful when the romance of your youth becomes the reality of your old age, man.
Be careful what you wish for.
Be careful what you wish for. You're probably going to get part of it. I thought of that, about how Richie represents that. Richie's always represented that to me. When I first met Richie and he was healthy and he was playing really strong, I remember saying to him, man, you're a classic example of somebody who always wanted to be on a band bus. He just wanted to be on Buddy Rich's bus, man. He wanted to be on a band bus. He wanted to be one of those guys. He loved being on the road. He was driving in a van with Eddie Jefferson for years. He loved it. That's who he was, man. Alto Madness. How we're going to go out there, that experience. And he pushed too many boundaries out there, man. And he did not spend enough time working on his art or himself. And I think he would agree with that. Whereas Irv spent all that time being a family guy and working on his art and himself and influencing young people around him and being a guy. And those are kind of the poles. Those are the polarities of this experience.
Playing saxophone provides a reason to wake up in the morning for Irv. I mean, even if he doesn't practice his horn anymore, the fact that he can gives him a reason to put his pants on in the morning.
Yeah.
And once you get up and put your pants on, then you got to eat something.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to return the phone call that you got, and then you're living.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's the reason to wake up in the morning.
It's the reason.
That's exactly right. That's my theory when people say art is the frosting on the cake, we can't afford it, or no, art is the cake, we must have it. My response is no, art is the appetite. Art is the hunger for a living. It's the reason you wake up in the morning. What, you're going to wake up to buy another television? There's nothing on it anyway. No, it's ridiculous.
Okay, so we haven't quite finished, but we're almost finished here.
Yeah, we're a day away from completing the assignment.
Right. What was the assignment?
The assignment was to go on tour, on the road, keep eyes and ears open, try to have a sense while we were doing it of what in fact we were doing, and then maybe reframe it here on tape.
Right, so we're doing that right now.
Yeah, so that's the part we're at.
We noticed that every club is different, and each club in its own way reflects something about the community that it serves.
Absolutely. Jazz, which used to, my image of it was that it was, neighborhood-oriented, community-oriented, territory-oriented. Now it really requires patronage, or it seems to require patronage.
On a certain level, if you want to get paid and treated in a certain way, because all of the other clubs that we have played have been neighborhood clubs and have been more or less community-oriented places.
Right.
You know, the place that we're playing right now in Cleveland, Nighttown, it's in a neighborhood.
It's in a neighborhood, and the guy who runs it is very much a part of the community, and he's known as a serious guy. And he said last night, it's most businesses, you break even at 50%. He said, I break even at 100%. Well, there it is. So when I say patrons, what I mean is that even here, he's got a bunch of people around that house musicians for him that do various things. It's not just a straight-up business. Jazz is not just a straight-up business.
No. Well, it's not even real. No,
it's not even a real business.
Well, if you were thinking of jazz as a business, then wouldn't you also have to think that you're going to reframe each of your set lists to maximize the most jazz per dollar?
Ultimately, wouldn't it go there? Yeah.
Wouldn't it go there? Because if you're in business to sell shoes, you will ultimately make the type of shoes that people want to buy. But you have a very narrow amount of room that you can move within in terms of what you do that will be more or less commercial.
Well, okay, so when you're selling shoes, you got a product.
Yeah.
And, if the product doesn't sell, you don't do it next year.
Yeah.
But if you're selling jazz, you're selling an experience, and it's not clear today what that experience is, I think. That's another thing that I kind of feel out here, although I'm in a position where I'm selling the Ben Sidran experience, which is pretty straight up. It's been going on for 45 years. So we have something that we can kind of monetize, kind of codify. But if you're just going to play jazz, 4 letters, generic, whatever that might mean to you, you don't have a product. That is not a product. Jazz is not a product. The experience of going to see a particular group or person in a place where both the person and the place can be described in some specific way, that's a jazz experience.
We keep coming back to the Green Mill, which I really think is one of the great clubs because it manages both to be a great place in its own right, and it also manages to elevate and celebrate the people that are on the stage.
And there'd be no way to say how it does that. I mean, you couldn't walk in the room and reproduce it. Although one thing you can say is all the places that we've been in that feel good have a person involved.
That's a great point. That is a great point. There has to be a person. It's also somewhat encouraging to go to all of these clubs and see who's coming and who's been there and who's going.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
and each city's different. I mean, like here at Nighttown, it's old folks, but they're old hipsters, man. They're not tourists. And you said that, all the places we're playing, none of them feel like tourist places. They all have a connection to where they are. We have not played for tourists. We're the tourists.
We are the tourists. And when we go to Europe, we say we are not tourists. We are a tourist attraction.
Right, we're a destination.
But we are tourists in this.
In our own country. Now, what about that? We go to Europe, we don't feel like tourists. We're here as jazz players going town to town, and we feel like we are the tourists.
There's a somewhat different message. When we go to Europe, we are able to say that we represent the best of America.
Yeah, well, we believe that.
Or
not personally, but culturally.
Yes, we represent a tradition that was created in America, and this is part of the best version of America. Mm-hmm. When we come to Cleveland...
you can't make the case.
Well, you can't in the same way, and it's so clear that it's been marginalized and reduced to like this small little memory, this little flicker of the flame.
Yeah, it's not even 2% or 1% anymore. Jazz used to be 1 or 2% of the record sales. They don't even put it on the chart anymore. It's when you look at jazz, it's not there. It's gone. It's gone. What we just touched on is very interesting to me. The reason when I go to Europe, I can really get off on talking the way I talk is because it's possible to represent the best of a cultural tradition that has parameters that we've experienced, that we know about. But in this country, when I go to talk about it, it's sort of like why I had to go to England to become an American Studies major. I had to get out of the forest to see the trees. When I'm here in the middle of the trees, and you're in Cleveland or you're in Detroit, and you know how the people have suffered, and you know how the people in these cities are being badly served by the political system today and everything else, you can't pull out of the forest to see the trees. It's not possible to frame it that way. And I think maybe that's part of the reason, almost in general, why I personally, I haven't spent as much time on the road as maybe I should have or I could have, but it's maybe part of the reasons why I didn't. It wasn't possible to do what I enjoy doing, which goes back to me liking to be an intellectual guy. And that, to me, was always the jazz experience. I always thought, you listen to Charlie Parker, the guy was an intellectual. You can tell by the way he played. The fact that musicians, when they were on the road, Phil Woods always talked about how that was an education. You got an education out there, and you were part of the tradition and the elders and all this thing. That all points to a certain very serious way of life that had to do with music, of course, but it wasn't just about the music. That's in the States today. That's not, you can't get there. You can go on tour, though. You can play the gigs. You can have fun. You can show up, roll up in Cleveland, and turn the audience out. They loved it. And you asked me today about the guy who flew in from North Carolina to see me. And how did I feel about it?
There was a guy who flew in from North Carolina to see you play
in Cleveland.
There
was a guy in Detroit who came from Chicago to see me because he wasn't in Chicago.
And there was a guy in Chicago who came from Colorado to see you.
And once again, we are not tourists. We are tourist destinations. Mm-hmm. No, but these aren't tourists. These are people connected to something that maybe I personally represent, but what we represent, which we started by saying what we think of as the best of the American experience. A heartfelt experience, something heartfelt, something sincere, something beyond explication maybe, something in many ways you don't have to talk about or want to talk about. So when these people come up to us after the set, they often don't know what to talk about. Hey, I saw you in Telluride 30 years ago.
Well, that's a common one. People often say, oh, I saw you here, or I saw you there, or I saw you here. Why do you think people say that? What is really trying to be communicated when somebody says, I saw you 30 years ago?
In the best case, maybe it means, I see you, you exist. Maybe in the most generous case, that's what it means. You exist, I've seen you. You haven't gone unnoticed. And then maybe in the average case, it's, hey man, I've been part of, your following, I'm a fan, or hey, I'm part of your economic base, or hey, I've been with you for a long time and I dig you.
Or I'm hip. I want you to see me.
That's right. That's it.
I dig you and I hope you see me.
It's like a little drop in a swimming pool. Like, what if you took a little red dye number 4 in an eyedropper and put it in an enormous swimming pool with lots of people spending lots of money ordering room service around the pool? Maybe that's ultimately the impact that we have. Or
we are the 4 drops of dye in a swimming pool, and who are the people around the pool?
And who's got the eyedropper? That's the
right. Right. If we are the dye, who's got the dropper? That's a good question.
Well, the people around the pool are the billionaires today that everybody aspires to become.
Who's in the pool?
I don't think anybody's in the pool. I think the pool is life.
You know, I have no idea what we just talked about.
No, it's not important. It's the fact that we're talking. It's everything. It's very Talmudic here, man. Jazz is Talmudic.
Absolutely it is. The composition wasn't the important thing. It was the commentary. It was the solo after the head.
Right, jazz is Talmudic. Maybe that's something to do with why the first time I thought about the real impact of what jazz meant for me was listening to old guys daven in the synagogue, man, and feeling what it felt like to be in a room with these guys. You know, you couldn't understand what they were saying, and they were moving, and it was a groove, and it was a sound, and that to me was like, oh, that's a jazz experience. Yeah, I want to do that. I don't want to learn Hebrew. I don't care about my bar mitzvah, but I want to daven. Is it possible, please, to daven without speaking Hebrew? Because that's what I'd like to do.
It's called scat.
And that's why John Hendricks spoke Yiddish.
Well, my friends, we've come to the end of the Mobtown tour. That brings us back to the cave in the convent in Toledo, which, let's not forget, was John Hendricks' hometown. Back to the underground, huddled around the fire, warming our hands, making community, finding our own sense of family. I hope you enjoyed this little journey with me for the last month. I certainly had a lot of fun putting it together, and I hope to do more like this in the future. But I'll be back next week with another of my usual long-form interviews. Until then, I'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to Leo Sidran on the Scott Broccoli on the saxophone, Bill Peterson on the bass. I'm Dan Sidran. Thank you very much. Thank you, Toledo. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, all you kind folks, for coming out here tonight. We really appreciate it. Keep the flame alive. Don't give up.
Guys, I just want you to know I love you all. I'm so happy to be on the road with you, and I'm so happy to be playing with you.
Likewise, brother.
Yeah.
It's like family.
Yep, that's exactly what it's like.
Yep, you're on Mac Avenue.